Aviation, Economy, and Innovation Subcommittee. My name is Daniel Valenzuela. I'm honored to chair the subcommittee, District 5 council member, and I'm joined to my right, Councilwoman Thelda Williams from District 1, and to my left, Vice Mayor Laura Pastor, council member for District 4. So we'll move right along here. We start with the call to the public. We don't have any cards for this call to the public. We will have one to end the meeting as well. We do have some yellow cards that could be filled out for any item that someone would like to speak on. We have a couple there for a couple of items for a little later. The first item to vote on is the consent agenda, items 1 through 3. And we can pull them out one at a time unless everyone is ready to vote on a consent.
I'd move approval.
Second.
Motion to approve the consent agenda items 1 through 3. We have a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. The next item, information, discussion, and possible action. The item 4 is the request for reconsideration of item 12 from the April 26, 2017 subcommittee.
Mr. Chair, I requested this. I move that we reconsider this item because it wasn't clear what the actual motion was. Like I was kind of messy when I made it, so if we could reconsider it.
Aye.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we have a motion to reconsider. We have a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Now we'll reconsider the item, which is item 5, Terminal 3 Concession Program Strategy and Request to issue revenue contract solicitation.
Mr. Chair, they have prepared based on the minutes and the video, and I am concurring with their recommendation. I believe it's the comments we made about pouring rights would be considered 5 years in concert with the when they refresh their tenant improvements, changing the point allocation concept down from 250 from 300, increasing experience up to 200 from 150, and then including the following information as requested. Do you currently have an agreement in place that would prohibit a labor organization from engaging in a strike, picketing, or conducting other economic actions at the proposed concession operation? If yes, please list the labor organizations and the date the agreement was executed. Secondly, the information provided in response to this RCS question will not be considered as part of the panel deliberations or scoring criteria. And then lastly, increase the duration of the worker retention policy to 120 days, up from 90. So I move we approve this and forward it so they can proceed immediately.
So, go ahead, Vice Mayor.
I have one question. Will the language regarding the agreements with the organization be required response on the RCS? Yes. That's what I wanted to get clear. And my second question I think it's, I'm sorry, Hilda, I don't have it in front of me. The one, information provided in response to the RCS question will not be considered as part of the panel deliberations. Could you please explain that to me?
Sure. Mr. Chair, Vice Mayor, because the evaluation criteria don't provide a consideration of that issue, it becomes information, like a lot of information that we collect from the concessionaires, including who is the, a variety of things. And so this will be part of the information that is gathered.
Okay.
That is information so that the airport and the city have it across time, but in the deliberations, it isn't a fundamental part of how the concession evaluation is conducted.
Okay. And it's not part of the evaluation.
That's correct.
Okay. That's all I need to know.
Right. And there are no points to it, obviously. And so this was reconsidered, just as Councilwoman Williams stated, to clean up the motion.
Right. So
And essentially, this is what we voted on, but we
Correct.
want to make sure that it's crystal clear. And so
Mr. Chair, do we have a second?
Okay.
I was just summarizing for the people who are watching and
sorry,
in the
thank you.
audience. And so to make it clear, this is the motion that was voted on. It's just clear, crystal clear at this point. And so the records will show that. So we do have a motion and a second. We have no cards on this.
You have one
We do
card?
have one card on this. Sean Swearinger? Yes, sir. Did I say that right? Would you like to speak? Sure, absolutely. Please, yes, sir. The mic.
Good morning. I'm a small business owner here in the city of Phoenix. And looking back, I went to all the aviation meetings prior to where we are now, and look back at the Terminal 4 when they did the bidding, the RCS bidding for Terminal 4. They had an open concept in Terminal 4. There's no open concept in Terminal 3 now. With that being said, all the spaces that are for retail to be bid on are too large for a small business like myself to bid on without a prime contractor. I think that there's an issue with that because the city is talking about diversity and ACDBs being able to go in and be a champion for that particular right with small businesses. We're not allowed in this particular process in Terminal 3 with the open concept to even bid on a space of the RCS because it's too large. I feel that I've talked to quite a few other small businesses, and I may be the only one that's speaking about this now, but I feel that it needs to be addressed, that why is there no open concept, number one. Number two is the fact that why the space is so large that we have to go in with a prime, because we should have the right to bid on something at the airport without having to spend $1.5 million to basically go in any of the spaces that are out there right now. So I just like to bring that up.
Thank you, Mr. Swearinger. Do you have something, Vice Mayor?
Kinda.
Yeah, well, we have Mr. Bennett coming up to explain part of the process.
Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee, I think what we're referring to is the way that we packaged the opportunities in Terminal 3. The committee may recall that we're actually going out for 4 different packages, 2 food and beverages, and then 2 retails. And within each of those packages, there are opportunities for small business and local business participation as a sublessee or joint venture for those concessions. And so we actually are very strongly encouraging participation by the small and local business community in the solicitation process. But very similar to Terminal 4, we've broken the building up into packages, and Terminal 3 is much smaller and more condensed than what you have in Terminal 4, so we don't quite have those opportunities that we had in Terminal 4 to be able to carve out a standalone open concept. And the committee may also recall that 2 different occasions where we solicited for an open concept for 1 store in Terminal 4, we received no proposals for those concepts on 2 different occasions. So,
I'll just mention also, first, Mr. Swearinger, my chief of staff is in the room. I'd love to get your card or exchange information. And I would like to sit down with you and get your thoughts moving forward. What we did a few months ago, at least a couple of months ago, is we held a summit at the convention center to talk about the RFP process and the opportunities that we have. We invited small business owners, we've invited primes, we've invited, I mean, everyone who would be willing to come out and learn about how we are doing business at the airport, but also to get your feedback, because we want to make it something that we're all very proud of. So we'll continue to do that. You have my commitment and obviously Mr. Bennett's commitment. His staff is who put it on. But I'd love to meet with you and just get your thoughts moving forward as well.
I have
You
a
bring up a good
question
point.
about that. As a local girl and understanding some nuances of the airport, there was a point in time in the airport where local businesses didn't have to join with the prime in order to be able to compete with the prime. What I am hearing at this moment is that is very different. and the concept has changed, and that local businesses have to join a prime. And I have concern with that because I feel that local businesses should be able to compete for a space and be part of a larger, I guess, concept. And yet it's happening with people that are local, and also it's local employees, the economy staying within the realm of Phoenix. It's just a whole cycle of life, I guess I would say, in a business. So that does concern me. I also have spoken to local businesses that at one time wanted to have a concept where local businesses join together and collectively join together and work together to build their own concept without a prime. My question is, um, the statement that was made, is that true? Secondly, my second question is, if the concept local businesses can still compete, uh, are they competing? Are they out? Are they unable to compete? The concept is there that they can compete, but are they unable to compete due to how much investment they have to put in and dollars? So those are my two questions. Three, I guess.
Mr. Chairman, to Vice Mayor Pastor. And if I miss up or trip up on some of the questions, please cut me off and say that's not the question. But no, there's absolutely no prohibition against small or local businesses competing. The city many years ago evolved into the kind of a multiple prime concession concept of stores instead of direct leasing each and every one of the individual outlets in the terminal building. So what the concept is behind how we are currently doing concessions is that working with our advisors, we bundle various locations into one package so that it makes it more economically feasible for people responding, so that they have exposure in different locations instead of just one location, because one location may underperform other locations. And so you bundle them to make it as efficient as possible.
Mr. Chair, Vice Mayor, I'll pop in here and tell you in two ways. This is an outgrowth of lessons we learned post 9/11 and during the 07 to 10 recession. Was some units will do well. When times are great, everybody does great. But when times don't do well, specialty retail suffers severely and needs to be packaged so it can ride the wave of economic ups and downs. And so we still have the delivery of service in these unique categories, but they're packaged with something that is going to carry the freight when times aren't as good. So that the more staple retail is packaged together with the more opportunistic retail that works better when times are good but falters. And so we had some pretty severe problems in both situations where that was not something we had previously done. And so that's really been the evolution towards creating packages. And as we move from an ACDB program to a small business program based on our disparity analysis, what we are pursuing is goals associated with, aspirational goals associated with small business participation. And often the only way that that small business participation happens is through a subleasing concept, because you can't reach a level of activity. So that's actually a practical way for someone to, they're a tenant of, much as they would be if they were directly leasing from us, they're a tenant of a prime, but they still are running their own business in their own unit, making their own investment. And so as to the why do we package, that's kind of why the packaging has arisen.
So what I am hearing is, yes, it has changed, and yes, it is true. And let's just call it what it is. I mean, there were times, where local businesses could compete on their own without a prime.
And
And what I am hearing now is that our packages are set up that they have to be with the prime. They could sublease through the prime, but that's the way the packages have been built.
so a prime is not mandated, so the notion of packaging together,
Oh.
and so the policy choice, absolutely, we could go back to not having packages. We think that's economically more dangerous for the concessionaires.
Okay.
And that's really why, that was actually as much the motivation of why we've moved there, because of how much of our, particularly in Terminal 4, how much of our program is in the land side or before security screening. Those are rarely dangerous investments because they tend to be much more variable about people's willingness to spend. And then with the airlines, and particularly in some cases on the north side of the terminal, being a little bit more variable in the amount of activity they have running through the terminal. Sometimes it's good on one concourse and then it might be famine because they've moved all the flights to another set of gates. The packaging has helped to smooth that out, but that's more of a lesson we've been learning across the last 10 or 15 years. And so we didn't completely do that the first time we did this and redid leasing in kind of 03, 04, 05. But we did some packaging and there were some standalone units, and we have continued to find, particularly in specialty retail, with limited exceptions, Native American Gifts is one, where we don't necessarily always have to package those together. Land side with air side, specialty with newsstand tends to be a methodology that creates more success for the concessionaires when the economy goes up and down or the flights go up and down. But it is absolutely a policy choice for sure, that we can adjust or change.
Okay. Let me just look at the package.
Councilwoman?
Having been around for a long time, I remember back when we were smaller and we had those packages. And as we grew, it became very apparent that it was very difficult financially for them to compete. And I think the packaging was a way to find a compromise so that we could be inclusive and get our small businesses in. I think it's been very productive. I think there are some of them that are out there will tell you it's been very successful for them. And I really think it's the way we move forward, because I won't repeat your explanation, but it does go like this, and it provides a protection on their investment. So I wholly support what you're doing.
Well, there are definitely pros and cons, but it does give, in many cases, it's given us a chance to get small businesses engaged. It's really different. That's why we wanted to have the summit. We did it a couple months ago. We'll do it at least once a year. But we want more small businesses engaged. Absolutely. That's where we're going to be able to recover, more tax dollars and so on and so forth. But it's much different doing business at the airport than it is elsewhere, and this is giving the protections to allow some of these small businesses to actually realize a dream and do business at, Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport. We can always get better, and we always have to continue to pay attention to that. So I'm really looking forward to meeting with you, sir, and with our team as we move forward. But so on this particular item, we do have a motion and a second. If there's no further discussion, we can vote. Councilman Nowakowski, have you joined us?
That's me.
I sure do. I'm on the phone right now, yeah.
Okay. All right, so we have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Can you read off the motion really quick for me, please?
Want me to reread it?
Yeah,
You want
for
to?
the benefit of Councilman Nowakowski, if you can reread the motion.
Okay, this is the motion from our last meeting that wasn't really clear. It's the staff's recommendation amended as follows. Potential city council consideration of soda pouring rights at T3 will occur not occur before 5 years and in concert with the concessionaire requirement to refresh their tenant improvements. Adjust the allocation of point within the scoring criteria by reducing points for concept down to 250 from 300. Increase points for experience up to 200 from 150. Include the following information request as part of the required proposal response to the RCS. Do you currently have an agreement in place that would prohibit a labor organization from engaging in a strike, picketing, or conducting other economic actions at the proposed concession operation? If yes, please list the labor organizations and the date the agreement was executed. The information provided in response to this RCS question will not be considered as part of the panel deliberations or scoring criteria. And lastly, the increase in the duration of the worker retention policy to 120 days up to 90. That's the motion.
Thank you.
Okay, so that's the motion. We have a second. Any further discussion by any of my colleagues? Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? If you oppose, say aye. Motion passes unanimously by the entire subcommittee. Thank you. Now we'll move on to item 6, which is the FAA flight path update. Now, how long has it been? A year and a half at least?
It's been about a year and a half, but it's been a week since our last update to the subcommittee.
Yeah, right,
and
but
nothing has happened since our
About 2
update last
years?
week. It's, yeah, 2.5. I was October
council.
of 20.
But there we have it. Vice Mayor just told me, since she came onto the council, we've had this issue.
Right.
Well,
So
now we know.
we're correcting the issue since she came on the council. So thank you, Jim. So this, Mr. Bennett, this has been a standing item, is my point. It's been a standing item for every meeting because of the issues that we have with the FAA flight path. It's been very beneficial, I think, most of all for the people who live with these issues in their own neighborhoods. So I know it's only been a week since our last update. I'm assuming not much has changed unless you have anything else for us.
Mr. Chairman, that's correct. Now, nothing has changed since we were last before the subcommittee. We're still awaiting a resolution of the litigation and the oral arguments that were held on March the 17th of this year, and we don't know when the court may make a decision.
Okay, thank you. We don't have cards on this. Any questions or comments from my colleagues? Okay, we'll move on. Thank you. We'll move on to item 7, so we'll keep you here, Mr. Bennett. And I believe Miss Christina Mattson, if she is, you're the one-man band here.
I am. Ms. Madsen is been very ill this
Okay.
week and is not going to be able to join us today. So
She'll be okay. It's something going around.
hopefully we'll make a speedy recovery.
Yes, sir. So this is for the rental car center request for concession and lease agreement, changes in insurance of an independent operator parcel, revenue contract solicitation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee. And today what would like to do is seek your recommendation to the Phoenix City Council of changes to our rental car agreements at Sky Harbor International Airport. There have been several issues that we've been dealing with over the past several months. The council may recall that last year, the City Council authorized a 1-year extension to the existing agreements with the rental car industry to enable us to conduct these negotiations. We've been negotiating with them almost every other week for the past several months, and I'm happy to say that today we're bringing forward a recommendation that is a consensus of staff, but also our industry partners. The rental car center at Sky Harbor Airport opened back in 2006. And what you see here is that 5 of these 9 rental car brands that we have displayed on this slide had separate agreements and were independent companies at that time. Now today, these 9 brands have consolidated into the 3 brands that you see over on the left side of this slide, the Hertz Group, Enterprise Holdings, and Avis Budget Group. And so on a nationwide basis, those 3 large companies control about 95% of the rental car business in the United States. And here in our Phoenix market, they control about 90%. And so due to this consolidation, we are requesting that we enter into direct agreements with these 3 large companies. Now, the agreement changes that will occur or need to occur are represented on this slide. We need to assign the leases for the ground areas and their service centers that surround the rental car center. For example, Dollar and Thrifty, their agreements need to be assigned to Hertz. And then we need to amend and restate the ground lease agreements with these companies. And then, as I mentioned before, we need to enter into a new concession agreement with these three large companies. Now, as part of these negotiations, we've also been successful in working with our industry partners to provide the city with an assurance and protection of our customer facility charge, or the CFC. Now, the council may recall that the CFC is an integral source of funding for SkyTrain Phase 2. It's actually the source of funding that built the rental car center. It is used to maintain and operate the rental car center. So our industry partners have agreed with us on a couple of provisions that would guarantee that customer facility charge going forward. The first is an obligation payment. So in other words, that if something, if for some reason the CFC is deemed legally void, that the industry would work with the city to figure out a way to institute a different revenue stream to make up those payments. And then second is a contingent payment. If for some reason the collection of the rental car, the customer facility charge is not at the levels that it needs to be, the industry has agreed to work with us to make up the difference. Now, when we look at the independent operators or the smaller operators at the rental car system center, we have two operators, Six, Fox, and Advantage. Now, we classify these as smaller independent operators, and they, here in Phoenix, they have about 10% of the market, and nationwide, they have about 5% of the market. Now, there are more than 3 of these size companies in our area, and so therefore, we are recommending a competitive process for the concession opportunities at Sky Harbor for these second-tier or smaller companies. So we would do a 2-step revenue contract solicitation. The first step is just for qualifications to make sure that firms are qualified to be able to operate in the on-airport environment. And then the concession rights would be awarded on the second step, which is just a bid of the minimum guarantee. So whoever had the highest 3 bids would be given that opportunity. And then after we go through that process, we would need to terminate the long-term ground lease with Advantage in order to enable us to reconfigure the car rental facility based on the results of these solicitations. So these agreement changes, we think, will allow us to continue to provide the best customer service to the visitors and to our community. Will allow us to maintain our facilities, improve our operational efficiencies, and ensure that we retain the revenues necessary for us to complete SkyTrain and do other operations in the rental car. So, Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, our recommendation is as represented on this slide. Happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Okay, any questions for Mr. Bennett, Councilwoman Williams?
I don't have any questions. I appreciate you and your staff staying on top of this and always looking for a way to maximize the space and the revenue. So I would move staff recommendation for approval.
We have a motion and a second. Thank you for being so thoughtful on this and for making sure that all of our partners, for building a concession amongst our partners. Many people don't realize that 3 companies own 10 rental car brands that currently have 90% of the business, and frankly, these 3 companies would be the only ones who could bid anyway in the city of Phoenix. So why not save our industry partners some money, tax dollars, city staff time, and since you've already built a consensus, I think it's great. It saves us all a lot of time and money. And so, and I agree with what you're doing for the Tier 2 operators as well. Obviously, that is competitive, and the right thing to do is to have a fair process there. So that makes a lot of sense as well. So we have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? We don't have any cards. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Okay, the final item for action, item 8, this is for the RFP for the sale of the redevelopment of the city-owned Knipe House property at 1009, 1016, and 1025 North Second Street.
Mr. Chair, members of the subcommittee, Eric Johnson, who is Deputy Economic Development Director, and Nathan Wright, who are Program Manager, are going to walk you through the property that is in and around Second Street and Roosevelt, and share what staff's recommendations are for issuing an RFP, including the evaluation criteria, the work we've done with the community, and we stand ready to take any feedback you have as we start working our way towards the issuance of an RFP, subject to your concurrence.
Thank you very much, Paul. Good morning, subcommittee members. Today we're going to, as Paul mentioned, we're going to walk you through the Knipe House property and give you just a little bit of the background. Many of you have seen this property come through subcommittees in the past, so we're hoping this third time will be a charm. But right now you're looking at an image of what's out there in existing conditions today. We have the historic house on the left-hand side, which we've worked to restore from fire damage earlier. In the middle, you're seeing the impact of the Roosevelt Row CDC doing a community garden effort as a temporary use that council approved earlier this year, which is to allow them to be on our property until such time as the RFP concludes and we have a development ready to move forward. And then on the right-hand side, you see a result of another agreement from late in 2016 to provide some temporary parking to help with the community's needs on temporary parking needs as well as an interim condition until the RFP is successful. So just to give you a quick background, just a refresher, I think a few of you have been through this before, but the city originally acquired this back in 2002, 2003 as a result of an original RFP for a project back in that time. Unfortunately, that project didn't move through. There was a recession that kind of hit a little harm come through that project, and so the contract that was on that site was ended. We retained control of the project. During that time, unfortunately, the Knipe House was hit by arson and was burned, and we used our insurance monies to stabilize the house, put on a new roof, and repair what damage we could to get it back to a condition that was stabilized in that condition. Since that time, in 2012, we did another RFP coming near as we came out of the recession. We were looking to try to get that property back into use. There was a successful proposer through that process. Unfortunately, they were unable to acquire some of the financing that would have allowed them to do their project, and that project ended. So we then we worked with the community and did additional outreach, working with DPI, Downtown Phoenix Inc., to try to address additional input from the community to try to help us gauge some of the community input during the changes that were happening as a result of the growth in the community, as well as looking at the changing market conditions that have happened in the past few years with all the construction that has grown around that project. Significantly looking towards the large addition of a lot of residential in that area around the corner of 3rd Street and Roosevelt. So that moves us on to some of the site description that I'll pass on to Nate.
All right, thanks, Eric. As you can see, the site is bisected by 2nd Street and totals to about approximately 1.5 acres. Our appraisal is in process and should be completed in the next couple weeks. And the temporary uses that Eric described, the parking and community garden, they end later this year but can be continued on a month-to-month basis after that. And the zoning really emphasizes a pedestrian-oriented development and kind of to serve as a transition to the mixed-use neighborhoods that surround the site. There's been a lot of outreach done on this in preparation for the release of this RFP. Dating back since 2015, we had a strong working group of community leaders and people that have went out to the community, interviewed 25 plus stakeholders around the area as well as neighborhood associations, and they compiled their feedback into a report that we will include in the RFP for developers to see exactly what the community has talked about and what's important to them. And the final report highlights are, first and foremost, what came through loud and clear was to protect and preserve the Knipe House, as well as a need for parking in the area and a desire for affordable and workforce housing. So our desired project is an urban mixed-use infill project that rehabilitates and reuses the Knipe House in the first phase, not a second or third phase, but in the first phase. And you can see in blue, we've changed this slide to reflect the feedback that we've received as we've gone out to the Evans Churchill, Roosevelt Row merchants, and historic preservation meetings. And there was a desire for ground floor activation, community gathering, garden, and open space. And there was a lot of input put into the plans and the codes that are in the area, and so we would ensure that whatever is proposed complies with that. There was also a desire to have each side of the street kind of stand on its own, have a diverse design and character, and a use that's appropriate for the neighborhood. And since the beginning, we've also talked about utilizing a shared parking model, as well as constructing the project in a timely manner. And this is our proposed evaluation criteria. First is the concept to redevelop the site and adaptively reuse the Knipe House. We've changed this second point as a public community benefit and return, as well as qualifications, experience of the proposer, and consistency with those plans. I'll kick it back to Eric here.
Thanks, Nate. In conclusion, we're coming here today to have a discussion about the recommendations to issue an RFP for the Knipe House properties. As Nate mentioned, the items that were shown in blue are just trying to show that during this process, since the time we started the reporting request, we have been doing a number of community outreach meetings, and so the lines that were identified in blue there are just trying to address some of the concerns that we've heard during this process. We do have 3 more community group meetings we're going to go to in between the time of this subcommittee as well as getting to formal, so we'll make sure to update the subcommittee and council as we go through that process as well. With that, we'd like to answer any questions that you may have.
Okay, yeah, we do have cards, so we'll go with the cards. We have two cards filled out by people who are not wishing to speak, but you're welcome to change your mind. Marked in favor, Jameson Newhoff, and marked opposed, Kenny Barrett. We do have cards filled out by people who would like to speak. We'll start with Carla Logan, marked opposed.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Carla Logan, and my husband John and I own the 2 properties adjacent from the Knipe House. I was fortunate enough to be on the working committee from the community to take a look at this RFP. We are a community in flux right now with the advent of tremendous development in our community, and we have lost a lot of the creatives, the small businesses, the artists that have helped develop this community and make it a desirable place to live. So I was very enthused with the opportunity to work with the city on coming up with some suggestions for this RFP. And when the city went to community with the criteria for this RFP, I was hugely disappointed that more consideration wasn't given to the report that was constructed by the working group. The criteria are very broad in this RFP, and I have real concern that the broadness is going to bring another big box development to our neighborhood, and that's, quite frankly, the last thing we need right now. There's a huge opportunity for creative development here. One of the suggestions of the working group was to divide this into multiple RFPs to get a diversity of scale and development and give the opportunity for developers that aren't huge developers that do big box an opportunity to submit on this site. In our community, the Oscar just opened last week, which is a tremendous example of a smaller development that's a great fit for our community that offers, economies of scale in different types of development. A few points that we discussed in the working group was preventing the moving of the Knipe House. Making sure that the Knipe House doesn't move will ensure economies of scale on this site. And if the house is allowed to be moved, there's great concern for another big box residential development that is more of a suburban model. Financial and community benefit, I feel, should be separate in the scoring points, and it looks like that may have changed since the presentation to the community last. But I am in favor of developing this site, but I think that more consideration needs to be given to the criterion and the scoring to ensure that a developer is held accountable to give maximum benefit to the community.
Thank you, Ms.
Thank you.
I have questions. Can you bring up the slide where, Carla, if you can come back up? So on the points, what would you change?
Well, we talked about some very specific things in the working group, and you saw the list of suggestions from the community, like green space, innovative development. There are multiple, suggestions, and I feel like some of those should be given points.
Right? And would that fall under number 1
I think that
or number 2?
I would say probably number 2, but if it's broken down more, then so public community benefit in return, I think is a very broad term. And when the city originally came to community, it was listed as financial return to the city, and that's changed now. But I have concerns with that being lumped together to one scoring criteria.
Because one of the things I was hearing out there in the community is that just the whole public parking, that Roosevelt Road.
That was a suggestion from the working group too.
So that was one of the things that, with the whole community purpose, that's one of the things that we asked to add in there. And making sure that it was just for residential parking.
Shared.
It was shared parking. The other thing is protecting the Knipe House, making sure that exactly what you're talking about, that they come up with a concept that keeps it there and incorporates it to whatever design that they have. And affordability is the other thing that we heard, is that a lot of these new apartments going up there in condos are just way too expensive, especially for artists. So those were some of the points that we made sure to put in there.
There's no workforce housing in the community anymore, so people that have helped build the community and work in the community can't afford to live there anymore. This is a huge opportunity for the city, I think, to do something really innovative and creative with this property in line with what the community is. I mean, we house the largest art walk in the country. We've, for years, had so many special, amazing, creative events. Big block development prohibits that. I mean, we have alley activation events. We have a tremendous community. So I have concerns with such a broad RFP fostering and continuing to sustain what our community has to offer.
All right, thank
So I would like to see maybe it reworked and then, brought out again. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Logan. It's marked in favor, Wayne Rainey.
My name is Wayne Rainey. I'm a business owner adjacent to the RFP site. I just wanted to support this release at this point. The neighborhood and the adjacent business owners I represent need this to happen, and we've waited a very long time for this, and we've gone through a lot of neighborhood outreach. There's a consensus that's been found on what needs to go there, and it's imperative that we get it out in this cycle. So I don't feel like we can wait any longer.
I have a question for Wayne also. So Wayne, I know that out of these public hearings or community outreach that we had, protecting and preserving the Knipe House was number 1, making sure that there's parking, especially for all the different events and retail that's on there, and the affordability. And, so do you see that in that?
I do. I think it's the city did an excellent job, and it's well thought out, and I'd like to see it go out as proposed.
All right, thank you.
All right, Mr. Rainey, are you finished?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, sir. Vice Mayor, you have a question?
Oh,
Or do you want to wait, or do you
sure,
want to?
finish that.
Okay. Marked in favor, Dorina Bustamante.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee. My name is Dorina Bustamante. Many of you know that I wear many hats here in the community as a community developer advocating for the arts, parks, historic preservation, and multimodal transportation. But today I'm specifically here representing my friend and client and collaborator since 2011, Mike Davis, who's the property owner of 1005 North 2nd Street, which is at the northeast corner of 2nd and Roosevelt, just immediately south of this assemblage of parcels. I'm here today to let you know that he's definitely in favor of advancing this process as one RFP, and that we as a team are in total agreement with many of the points that Carla made as far as the RFP being more explicit about innovative use, district parking, affordable housing, public space, accessibility, and we do not want to see a big box development come into this neighborhood. But the area has sat unbuilt for way too long. The Knipe House absolutely needs to be rehabilitated and activated for permanent use, and whatever we can do to advance that ball, we would really suggest that you consider that. And as far as going back to that scorecard, I agree with Carla that financial benefits should be articulated as a different point to the community benefits. Obviously, the way the scope of work will probably be written out will be more individualized to point by point, but there is a difference as far as us in the community between community benefit and financial return. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bustamante. And the final card, marked neutral, Brent Kleinman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee. I look at this like many other RFPs that go in front of the city and the different subcommittees and council, with the devil truly being in the details of this. I think with our evaluation criteria you all have laid out, there's a lot of opportunity to go the wrong route and be able to defend it based on this point system, or go the right way and really do something that will benefit the Roosevelt Art District. So that's, I guess, where I come in as neutral, because the site needs to be redeveloped. The Knipe House, needs to be restored and dealt with, but we need to make sure you all stay away from our GIPLA-friendly buildings that have come up recently in downtown Phoenix, where we've got micro apartments of 400, 600 square feet at $1,200 a month. This needs to be something that is for the community and benefits the community, not just I made the best presentation that's going to get me the most points on this display. So looking forward to seeing these RFPs. I just think the hearings that come once those are submitted and the discussions that are had is where the real work's going to be done on this, because we are going to get people that want to put boxes in there and can score big points on this by writing the right thing about green space, putting solar panels here, doing something that sounds good and gets them the points but doesn't really benefit the community. So I just ask you all to be very careful when reviewing these proposals once they come in. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And I just received one card. We just received one card here for this item, Ms. Diane Barker.
Thank you, Chairman and Committee. Diane Barker. I was on the original RFP for the Knife House, and I can remember reading quite a bit of literature on it before we made our decision. There was some outcry at the time. They were going to build a senior property, and there were some people that felt like that particular spot would not be conducive for seniors to be. It's a very loud area. Although I live downtown, and I know seniors that live around a lot of loud music, and they haven't really been complaining. But my point here is I like what some of the previous speakers were saying, and particularly my councilman, is you need to have something that is more rent palatable to working people downtown living and going around the area. I see there's a lot of development and it is like over twice the price that I know that seniors are paying for some of the housing that you've made available. You need to have working people. Some of your seniors are going to continue working. and to have a good mix. And the other thing I can say is that we have elements here, and the city has adopted standards to cut down on emissions and to do renewable energy, but all of that has to be translated into the user, the habitant, so that their habits are reflective of the values that we are putting forth in all the money. So I'm saying that when there's a management company that comes in to run this, they need to be educated on how to entice and ensure that the people living there are going to be part of this greater community. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Barker. And she has that timing down. She's spoken so many times. You always maximize the time. You do such a good job. Okay, so that was our last card. Any questions or comments by my colleagues?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Okay, you go.
Vice Mayor, Pastor?
As Diane had spoken about, we did have an RFP beforehand, and there was someone that was awarded. And during that RFP, what I understand is that Knipe House was going to be part of the community within that area. My question is, what is the difference between the original RFP that was released back then to now? Because I hear there's some concerns that the Knipe House may be moved. So I just need clarity.
Mr. Chair, Vice Mayor, to answer that question, I think the biggest scope of change has been two things. Number one is that the prior RFP was just seeking redevelopment for any proposals. We didn't have a desired project that was this broad in category. It was just seeking infill development. It really ended with the urban mixed-use infill project. There was a requirement to maintain and rehabilitate the Knipe House in that prior RFP as well. That came out through the community engagement. But the things that have really changed since the prior 2011, 2012 RFP and now has been that really there's been this engagement for the comments that are in blue really here that are showing up is the stressing of the ground floor activation. Of course, we always require something to comply with the downtown codes and requirements. The shared parking model is new. That wasn't a requirement in the prior RFP as well. And then really it just comes down to the comments of trying to adapt to the changes that have happened in that community, because back in 2011, 2012, all that other residential growth had not happened. And we've been hearing interest from multiple parties that might not even propose any residential, but might be proposing flexible workspace, creative space, and other products that might not even include any residential component as well.
Mr. Chair, Vice Mayor, there is no difference between our expectation for how the Knipe House would have been treated in the prior RFP or in this RFP. We want it to be reused, and I'm not at all particularly comfortable with the notion of moving the Knipe House. I think it would be an unusual response that would suggest that that's an okay thing. And so our expectation was a adaptive reuse of the Knipe House in places. While we have not specifically set that as a requirement, it's absolutely our expectation that that's what's going to happen. And we could adjust that at the wish of the council.
Okay, so then it is protected. I just want to make sure.
The Knipe House is not yet. The Knipe House it's protected by its zoning, and we can explicitly state in the RFP that it is to remain, to be redeveloped and rehabilitated. That's what our desire and expectation is. That's a very easy addition.
Well, it says rehabilitated and
that's-
reused, so I just want to make sure that that's very clear for those that are going for the RFP, that that's what we desire.
You got it.
Or that's what we want, not desire. Okay. My second question is, I'm just going to be Laura, as blunt as ever. I know probably more than likely there will be somewhere, it will land in my office as asking for a giblet. And as you probably noticed last week, I had asked about workforce housing and an increase of workforce housing. And so my question is, where has there been any type of, I guess, piece incorporated in this regarding workforce housing?
Why don't I pick, guys, why don't I pick that up? Mr. Chair, Vice Mayor, I think the community commentary about that is going to be contained in the RFP and shared. The criteria have not specifically been set to say a precise amount of this or that, and we have actually not stated in any manner that you will achieve GPLET on this site if you
Oh,
propose
no,
a project.
I just know.
Yeah,
what will come up.
yeah, I imagine.
It's
as-
just, that's
yeah,
the
I imagine,
zone, and that's why I get this everything every time. This is the zone, and this is where it needs to happen. So let's just get clear. That's more than likely going to happen.
And so I think from our perspective, we will be communicating that the community's interest, and what we often tell folks in the RFP process is when we select somebody, we then tell them to go out to the community before we get too far into negotiating and go get to consensus with the community about what they propose. Because what they propose is just simply a starting point from which negotiations start. It is not the, or begin, it is not the, well, this is it, take it or leave it, because rarely does someone propose precisely what's either acceptable to staff or to the community. So we don't have a specific statement, Vice Mayor, because we don't know what the proposals are that are going to come in. We can certainly add to the criteria to state a desire, expectation, or other state related to workforce housing or affordable, whatever is the council's desire to reflect that. My only caution would be in getting into precision. So going back to the prior senior housing example from a number of years ago, there were 50 units that were developed on one side of the street, and then I think another 30 or 40 on the west side of the street. And that was a totally tax credit driven deal. It didn't work because they didn't get the tax credits. And so I think as much as anything, while we will be responsive absolutely to the community and the council's desires, my only comment would be it's important to leave some flexibility in the criteria, because if we too precisely try to nail to the ground all details, then we might have the unintended consequence of people's ability to come back and propose things gets very narrowed up. But that's also a policy choice of the council, and we can put in any number of suggestions from the council as to how we treat affordable housing or workforce housing. My suggestion would be if that's something that the subcommittee, the council desires to do, then I think you need to do that on a percentage basis as opposed to a finite number.
Vice Mayor?
So then I would like to relook at the criteria. I don't know if I guess my directive would be, I think this is how it goes, that we relook at the criteria in between now and when it gets to council.
So can we make a motion to pass this?
With the stipulation.
With the instruction to come back and talk with subcommittee members in advance of the formal. You can absolutely do that. Vice Mayor, if I could ask, is there, it would help us if you could give a little we'll study it all, but a little direction about the areas that
One of the things that we've been working, sorry, Chairman. Okay.
Yeah, of course.
One of the things that I know that's been concern to Kate, myself, and Laura, because we have most of the downtown area, and that's where we ask people come in for GPLETs. I think at that time and that point, we should have some type of formula of a percentage of apartments, housing should be workforce housing, and for a certain amount of time. I think that we as a city need to come up with some type of standard or some kind of policy. And I think that has to happen really quick, because every time we have a GPLET project that approaches us, we're in the same situation again, trying to change the point system. one of the things that I've worked really hard on this project is making sure that there is parking, because that's one of the biggest things that, as a council member of this district, that one of the community concerns was the parking aspect of it. So if we have city property that we're going to be giving up to an individual on an RFP, I want to make sure that there's not just parking for the Roosevelt Row individuals, but also for a beautiful park that we're creating into not only a park, but a venue where we have events and concerts and all that. So it could be actually just a block away where you can find some public parking. So I think that also adds to the point system under community benefit and public benefit. And that's one of the things that we heard. The other thing, addressing your issue about the Knipe House, is that just recently we had a project on 3rd Street in Roosevelt where we had a historic home we thought was protected and was actually just moved across the street. So individuals were concerned that this would happen with the Knipe House also. So that's why the outrage, and they wanted to make sure that it was protected and preserved. And that language is put in there because all of a sudden just having a historic property house doesn't mean you can't just pick it up and move it now. It's been done in the past. So we wanted to make sure that the Knipe House stays there, it's preserved there, and it's operating somehow, some way. I believe what's going to happen is we're going to have an RFP with all kinds of different ideas, designs, and opportunities for the city of Phoenix. We as a council can actually deny it and send it back out if the project isn't what fits in our community. So I think it's a great opportunity for individuals that want to take a bite at this and bring a proposal to us. And if it's something that we feel that doesn't fit in the community, in the master plan, then we have a second bite at the apple, as they say. So this is, these were some of the concerns that I heard out there in the community, and that's one of the concerns. That's why we have the community benefit at so high as 300 points, and also the redevelopment of the Knipe House at 350.
Mr. Chair, members of the subcommittee, maybe one thing we could do, and we have done this in some other RFPs, not so much in downtown redevelopment, but in other areas where we created more definition around what number 2 says, community benefit and return, and we get more prescriptive without directly allocating the points, but we talk about the necessity of workforce housing, or we talk about open space, and that we are very specific about the kinds of things that earn points, while recognizing if we, so that would be one way we could get after it, but we'll really take your direction about what you think creates the greatest value that you're trying to achieve, as well as still allows us to move forward.
Yeah.
I'd like to make a motion to approve staff's recommendation on the RFP.
We have a motion and a second. Did you get your concerns answered, Vice Mayor?
Well, yeah, I just know that we have a second in between this time and when it hits council, I can look at everything, and at council, I can make becomes a different item, or not item, or look at this. I think you guys have heard from us that we need some clarity on these points. The other thing is that I really want to make it clear that we are preserving the Night House. So,
Vice Mayor, we will
know.
make that explicit, explicitly stated.
Right,
Okay.
absolutely.
So,
Great, we have a motion and a second. No more cards. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Okay, thank you. We have one more shot. Speaking of another bite at the apple here for call to the public, we have no cards. Future agenda items. Any requests from my colleagues?
I have a request. Can we actually put the Circles building, just get an update on that at our next coming meeting?
What update?
I want to find out what's going on.
That they destroyed it?
We'll,
Well, Well, they keep on pulling demo permits, and I'm just wondering what's going on with the.
At the subcommittee's pleasure, we can share with you what it is we know that has transpired. That probably would include folks from planning and development who
Perfect.
are responsible for the permitting side of things.
Any other agenda items? Any requests? Here, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.